Okay, we are good to go. I hope tech's working for me. Everybody online, just one last check. You can see me, you can hear me, and you can see the presentation. Please, thumbs up, hearts. Good, we are good to go. All right, excellent. All right, well, for those of you online, we have got a jam-packed live audience here. I can't turn the I would turn the camera around, but I won't. But they're busily eating and drinking. And so if you are local and you are in Sydney, next time, make sure you come inside here because you've got food and drinks and everything like that. Everybody else, you can smell it and you can, envisage what that looks like through the microphone and through the camera. All right. So today, what we are talking about, we are looking at how we can extend Copilot to your line of business apps. And we've got the amazing Cameron Dwyer here who is going to present some real world demos, tech. Hopefully our tech works. We've just been playing around with some stuff, but hopefully that works. So I'm going to not hold the stage for too long, but I do want to just present a couple of different things for us before we kick off to Cam. So first of all, just quickly, the agenda, just a little bit of housekeeping for the jam-packed audience here. We do have some food, which you've already seen. You've already got the drinks and we are good to go. Just don't take the drinks out of the fridge. Just use the ones that I've put on the table there, or else I'll get in trouble. Toilets down the end there as well. There is another session going on, so just be a little bit quiet there too. And then I'm just going to go through a little bit, well, very, very quickly, some things that there was this little event happening last week called Microsoft Ignite. There's a lot of announcements and things that are coming. I'm going to whiz through those very, very quickly and then hand over to Cam to do his thing. We do have a video that is coming as part of Cam's presentation that should work. But just bear with us for a couple of minutes while we set that up when Cam wants to present that. All right. So first of all, just to our sponsors, to Michael and the team here at the Reactor, really appreciative of all of their efforts for making this space available for us to use and to do this every single month. And also to Digital First, the food and the drinks and all of that sort of stuff is care of them. So thank you very, very much for everything that you guys do for us. Just a quick little plug from me anyway, because I can. I'm just about to launch this new course, SharePoint and Copilot Mastery. It is going to be open up tomorrow. And you can see that little, I keep telling everybody that SharePoint is the center of everything and nothing works without SharePoint, right? So that was reiterated last week at Microsoft Ignite. Jeff Teeper there on stage. SharePoint is the central part of everything. So if you want to learn SharePoint and Copilot, everybody wants to learn SharePoint and Copilot. I'm going to help you. So head over to that link and register. It's going to be opening up tomorrow for early bird access and for founders as well. All right. So just moving on to Copilot, everything Copilot related at Microsoft Ignite. And yes, it was all focused, this massive event was focused around Copilot and AI. And one of the two big areas were agents and also actions. So these things that we call agents, there's going to be quite a few, or a number that are there out of the box that are going to do a few specific things that we'll take a look at in just a sec. But one of the big things is the general availability of agents inside of SharePoint as well. So every single SharePoint site is going to come with a Copilot agent just there, grounded in that SharePoint site and the contents of that SharePoint site, which is pretty exciting. And then also we can scale that down granularly right down to even a specific document. So you can create custom agents inside of SharePoint. If you are a site owner, you're going to have that capability inside of SharePoint as well. But some of the out-of-the-box agents that are coming or are going to be available are the facilitator, the project manager, and also the employee self-service agent as well, that are going to be there just by or available for you by default. So you can see there that the facilitator agent is going to work inside of Microsoft Teams meetings. So being able for you when you invite it into a meeting to take notes and co-author on different and collaborate on the meeting notes as well at that same time as well. Project manager agent, all around your project management, automating your project management tasks and buckets and things like that inside of Microsoft Planner. And then the employee self-service agent inside of BizChat, right? So business chat inside of Teams or in the browser as well, and going to be able to answer or self-service workplace policy related type of questions as well. So they're all coming out of the box, as well as that top one, the ability for you to create agents natively inside of your SharePoint sites as well. I will have a demo if we have time later. Then I'm more than happy to go through that SharePoint Copilot agent capability as well at the end of this as well. Copilot Studio, introducing this autonomous agentic capability. I think agents in this or agentic agents are going to be a pretty frequently used topic around 2025, but you're going to be able to build agents that can actually do stuff for you. All right, so they'll be able to sit there, listen for things, act on things, and actually perform actions. So think of things like emails coming in or tickets being requested or added to ticketing queues or things like that. An autonomous agent will be able to sit there, listen for things, and then actually go and do some tasks for you. Agent library. There will be some templates for commonly used type of activities as well. So that'll be all there ready for you to utilize. Last two things about agents, Copilot Studio and Azure AI. There's some new tools to be able to build your agents inside of there too, or pro code and low code. So if you are a dev, then there are some tools coming, and Cam will no doubt touch on that. But there are also some low code or no code type of scenarios there that Copilot Studio can enhance as well. Now, M365, there's way too many announcements and things that came out of Ignite around this. There will be a link in a minute that you can use to go and look at the Microsoft Book of News that has everything that you need to know about the announcements in there. I'm not going to go through all of these, but delegating repetitive tasks through agents, I think, actions. Actions are going to be really, really big. All right, so being able to create your own custom actions, and from early looks, it's really, really easy for you to be able to do that. All right, it's all done through the browser, and we can do that no code at all. Analyzing screen sharing of content with Copilot inside of Teams. PowerPoint gets a stack of new features as well. And also OneNote gets a little bit of love there too, with some multimodal notes, as they call it. Copilot Pages, I'm not sure if you've seen Copilot Pages before, powered by Microsoft Loop, but that is going to also have some enhancements coming around content creation inside of there. And a big thing around the adoption, so the analytics side of things. Seen a little bit of this. There's some really good analytics pieces coming into the admin center as well. So being able to measure user adoption and usage and things like that, which is really really good. And the Copilot prompt gallery. So that's getting a little bit of a makeover as well. So the ability for you to save prompts and share prompts inside of your organization, right? So it's like your own little gallery of prompts that you are going to be able to share with other people inside of your organization as well. Now this is big, right? So SharePoint or SAM, so SharePoint Advanced Management capabilities. So there was some, Microsoft did get some feedback about, making Copilot available for everybody. But what about, preparing for Copilot rollouts? So securing content, oversharing, all of that type of stuff that needs to be thought about before enabling Copilot. SharePoint Advanced Management, which was part of SharePoint Premium, is now coming with your license. So it's going to be free, basically, as part of that licensing. It's going to give a stack of really good controls and governance and compliance around your content inside of SharePoint. And as I mentioned before, yes, that was a slide from Ignite as well. I'm stealing some stuff, but borrowing some stuff, I'll give it back. But SharePoint is basically underpinning a lot of things inside of unobtrusively sometimes across Microsoft 365. And yes, nothing works without it. I'll stand by that. And then if you do want to take a look at all of the news from Ignite, and there's a stack of it, just jump over there and you can have a look. Microsoft have got a really good book of news available for you as well. Lastly, if you're not subscribed for all the updates and everything that's coming, jump over there and sign up to the emails that I send on a weekly basis, sometimes more. Head over there. Now, that was a massive fire hose of information. These slides will be available also. So for everybody online, these slides will be available post-event. I'll actually put a link to that while Cam's doing his presentation as well. With that, we're going to hopefully make this work and switch over, and Cam's going to come up on stage and start his presentation, I hope. So I'm going to move this over here.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Now we practiced.
It's all going to go like clockwork.
It is. I will hopefully see you now. We should be good to go. That's there. Now, what I wanted to do. Are you sharing?
Mm-hmm.
Sharing on that screen because you're not plugged in. So what you're going to need to do, have you got USB-C? No, USB-C here.
Yeah, USB-C.
We catered for online. We didn't cater for the jam-packed audience in here.
So let's talk about why we extend Microsoft 365 Copilot and talk about what we get out of the box. So really, what Microsoft 365 Copilot brings to us is it's the LLMs, the foundational models. That's sort of based on ChatGPT and all that data that's been ingested from the worldwide knowledge. And on top of that, you also get your data that's in Microsoft 365. So all that SharePoint documents, your OneDrive, emails, calendar, things like that. That's your data inside of Microsoft 365. So it's grounded in that as well. And then we've got the way that it's surfaced. We've got the Microsoft Copilot business chat experience, and we've also got the Copilot experiences inside of things like Word, Excel, Outlook. And Copilot's also got the ability to augment that and reach out in real time to information that's on the internet, not just the grounding data that's in the LLMs themselves. But then moving beyond that, most organizations only have a fraction of their data that's actually stored inside of Microsoft 365. There's many, many other enterprise systems that you would have that are sitting outside of that and aren't playing a part of that enterprise AI experience. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do we get access to these repositories of information that's sitting outside of Microsoft 365. And make no mistake, Microsoft's in a race here to be that central place where you come to reason over all of your enterprise data. I liken it much to the race we had for enterprise search almost 20 years ago now, where we had multiple vendors trying to own that one search box that you could come to perform your search across all your enterprise data. Now, this race for enterprise AI is much the same. Every vendor is looking for that way that they can reach into all of your enterprise systems and reason over it to be that one go-to place for enterprise AI. So this is looking at a very high level of the anatomy of Microsoft 365 Copilot. At the top, we've got the user experience. This is the user interface for how you chat with Copilot, whether that be the focused experience or the full screen experience of a business chat, or whether it be embedded inside of one of the Microsoft applications. At the very bottom, we've got the foundation models, which are the LLMs. Then we've got the knowledge and the skills. This is your data inside of Microsoft 365, and as we'll talk about shortly, it gives us a way of getting at other knowledge. The knowledge and skills, what data do we have access to, and what skills can we perform within those applications? And then bringing it all together, you've got the Microsoft Orchestrator. So this is what combines those different pieces. It's what takes the user's prompts coming in from the user experience and leverages the knowledge it knows about and the skills that it knows about and the foundation models, the ChatGPT underneath, and it brings all of that together in order to respond to the user's prompts. And what Microsoft's built as part of that orchestrator is that it's built in data governance. So anything you've put in place inside of Microsoft 365 as far as user security goes, purview, governance, security, labeling, the Microsoft Orchestrator will adhere to all of that when it responds to users through those prompts. So you've got that built in, and Microsoft's also built in safety and responsible AI guide rails in that orchestrator as well. So at a very high level, that's what Copilot is all about. And when we talk about extending Copilot, it's really split into two branches. You can swallow the blue pill or you can swallow the pink pill. And today we're just going to be staying on the blue side of things. And the blue side of things is really where you're going to reuse essentially what I think of as Microsoft 365 Copilot. You're reusing the UI layer, you're reusing the foundation model layer, and you're reusing, importantly, that Microsoft Orchestrator that provides the data governance and it provides the responsible AI checks and guardrails. But what you are extending there is you're extending the knowledge that's available to that system and you're extending the skills that are available to that system. And that's what we're going to talk about today. If you were to swallow the pink pill on the other side, what that allows you to do is it allows you to actually switch out the Microsoft Orchestrator for your own orchestrator. And allows you to switch out the foundation model for your own models. But I think if you're going to that type of development, you're not necessarily reaching in and extending the knowledge into your enterprise systems, but you're actually fundamentally changing that whole orchestration. It gives you a lot of power, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. So just to set the stage, we're going to be focusing on that, extending the knowledge and extending the skills. Another way that you'll often see is this diagram where we start with the LLM in the bottom corner. That's sort of your ChatGPT, the foundation model. The next step you go to is Microsoft 365 Copilot. So that's taking that foundation models and adding to it knowledge and skills that exist inside of your Microsoft 365 environment. That's probably what you're used to using. And then going beyond that, we're talking about extending that knowledge and skills even further. And that's where Copilot agents come in. We'll talk about those in a little bit later, but it's really extending it beyond what Microsoft 365 knows about out of the box to different systems and different skills. First thing we're going to talk about is how we can extend the knowledge of Copilot by using graph connectors. And graph connectors isn't a new technology. It's been around for, I would say, at least 5 years. But in order for me to explain how graph connectors can help us, let me first talk you through this diagram of how Copilot responds to a user's prompt. So on the right-hand side there, the user asks a question of Copilot. And in order to answer it, Copilot will look inside of what's called the semantic index for Copilot. Now, that is where all of your data that Microsoft 365 knows about, it's all indexed. You can think of that like a search index, but it's just a search index that Copilot's really good. That's what Copilot needs. Instead of a traditional search index, it needs one of these semantic indexes to be able to get its answers from. Where graph connectors come in is we can ingest data from external systems and add them into that semantic index. Once they're in the semantic index, Copilot sees them just as it sees first-party Microsoft data. So just like it can see your SharePoint files, just like it can see your emails, if we can ingest data in through a Microsoft Graph connector, then Copilot will just see that information. It becomes available everywhere inside the Microsoft 365 system. The key things to note about graph connectors is that they physically ingest data. So they will take data from your external system and they will pull it into that semantic index. So it's not taking absolutely all of the data, sort of like a search index does. It takes a lot of metadata information and it pulls it in. But you do have to realize that you're going to be slightly duplicating data. What I might do is we're going to do Q&A at the end because we'll have questions coming in from online as well. So if you could just hold it towards the end. And for those that are online, if anything does pop up, just pop it in the chat so you don't forget about it. Other people might be able to answer it, and Daniel might be able to jump in and answer some of those questions as well. But we'll certainly come back and we'll answer in-person questions and online questions towards the end as well. So yeah, the ingestion of data. So you are duplicating it potentially in your line of business system and the security implications as well. But as you pull information in, you do get to assign ACLs to it. So security access in your external system, you can map that to the users inside of Microsoft 365 from a security perspective. It's typically done on a scheduled crawled basis, so you're not looking at real-time data. So if it's data that is frequently changing, graph connectors probably aren't the best type of way to get at that data. And as we'll see in one of the demos we're about to go into, it's very good for unstructured data, but not great for structured data. And I'll talk about that more when we get into the demos. Now, the graph connectors, there's a few that Microsoft provide. I think there was 18 last time I counted for external systems. So there's not that many, but there's a huge ecosystem of external providers providing these connectors into their systems. And you can also build your own. You do need, it's a pro code sort of solution if you're going to build your own graph connectors. All right, let's dive into our first demo. For that, jump over here into a browser. And I'm going to start right at the basics. So let's say we want to reference information that doesn't exist inside of Microsoft 365, right at the Copilot. This is what Microsoft has rebranded BizChat, Business Chat. It's a full screen chat capability with Copilot. If we've got a file, say, we've got a file that doesn't exist inside of Microsoft 365, but I want to ask a question like, summarize this document into 5 bullet points. I'm sure you've all tried this sort of stuff before, but let's start right at the basics. So if I've got it on my device, I can upload it. Here I've got something about the Rosetta Stone. I upload that, fire off the prompt. But what it's really doing is it's uploading that file into my OneDrive, and it's responding from there. So really we're ingesting data. We're just manually ingesting data. The other thing we can do is we can reference a website. So using this article as a reference, how tall is a Rosetta Stone? So I'm asking about a Wikipedia page here. I'm feeding it. You can see here the dimensions of the Rosetta Stone. It's very specific in this article about the size of this Rosetta Stone. So I'm sure that there'd be heaps of information, be grounded in a lot of information about the Rosetta Stone, but because we're actually giving it something to ground it in, it's coming back with exactly what was written on that page, and it's giving us a reference to it as well. So, but the referencing and bringing in external data like that, it'll only work for public websites. It's not going to work for anything that's secured behind, a username and password. But we'll get to how we can sort those things out soon. So, I mean, that's very, very basic. And the end user, that's driven by the end user, but I just want to do a level set there. Next thing I wanted to talk about was those graph connectors. Start menu. And we now switched across to Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Underneath settings and search and intelligence, that is where we'll find the data connectors. That's where we set up these graph data connectors. And you will see here when it loads that I have 3 set up. I've got one to a SQL database. I've got one to, that's my public website. And I've got one to a policy management system, which is actually a custom connector, so that I developed a pro code solution to just bring in policies from a policy system that I have. And if we look at the experience of what it looks like to add a connector, you can see here that there's connectors available and there's a marketplace of them. And every connector is different as to how you set it up, but I'll just click on this one, which is a very useful one, which is the enterprise website connector. And the difference here, as you can see, you give it a name. You can point it at URLs. I think you can point it up to 20 different sites at one time. But the big difference here is when you set this one up, you also get to select an authentication method. So if you've got trusted sources of trusted websites that you use external to your company, or maybe inside your intranet as well, you could ingest them via this method and provide the credentials for them. And that information then becomes available, and Copilot will actually ground in that data just like it would ground in the data that's stored inside of your Microsoft 365 environment. So let's have a look what that looks like. And actually, I'm not going to start in Copilot for that. What I'm going to start in is just in Microsoft 365 search, because what I want to show you is the graph connectors existed before Copilot. And if you can connect data in through a graph connector, this is just Microsoft 365 search. These results that are coming back, our deployment timeline, I know that's something I would blog about on my website. And as you can see here with these URLs, these results that are coming back aren't from within Microsoft 365. Typically, Microsoft 365 search would only give you results from inside your tenant. This is giving me sites from out in the web, because we've added these in as a graph connector. Microsoft 365 knows about them. Likewise, we connected in that I said I'd created a pro code connector to hook into a policy management system. So if I was to search for an IT policy, we can see I am getting some results from inside of my Microsoft 365 tenant, but down here with a different logo, I'm getting a whole heap of policies which are coming in from our policy management system. What's also nice about graph connectors is you can actually elevate them to search verticals. So all of these policies down here, I've actually, and it's just a matter of pointing and clicking when you're setting up the connectors, is you can actually elevate those. Now I've got external data appearing almost as though it's just natural Microsoft 365 data. So not only is that available to search, but now when we go back out to the Copilot experience, we can ask questions about that data specifically. So if I was to say, what permissions do I need to get before working remotely? And is there any other info on working remotely that I should know about? Now, this Copilot, it's still got the whole world of information about it. It's still grounded in the LLMs. It's still grounded in all of our Microsoft 365 data, and it's grounded in that extra data we've brought in from our the policy management system. But it preferences, or it puts a weighting towards your Microsoft 365 data before it would go out to the internet or anything that's based in the LLMs. So what it's done here is you can see by these references that it's picked up that there is a remote working policy. And so it's answering me based on our remote working policy. Sometimes it actually throws in a BYOD policy here as well. You don't always get the same answer. Let's ask about something else. So I think someone knows my password. What do I need to do? Oh, that's up in the search. We want to go back into Copilot and ask that question. In here. I think someone knows my password. What should I do? Now, I'm sure there's a million things out on the internet about that. But again, because we're grounded in this data, let's see where it's going to give us as the reference. I don't think it's given us the reference that time. I would expect that to pick up our policy, but it doesn't look like it wants to today. Try that again. That's the permissions one. Give it one more shot before we move on, which is, I think someone knows my password. What do I need to do? Live demos. This time it has. This time it's found our password management policy that we've ingested in as well. Okay, last thing I wanted to show you about graph connectors is that they are very good at unstructured data, and that's what I would call those two things: a blog site and a policy management. So anything that's documents, web pages where there's lots of words, just a big vat of information. Graph connectors are really, really good at, because there's a lot of words there and it ingests all of it and it makes sense and it can give context to things. What it's not so good at is structured data. So databases, tables, relational data, because often those things, there's not a lot of context. It's just words and values. So what I wanted to show you is this SQL graph connector, SQL graph connector that is ingesting data from SQL in the same way. So for every connector you set up differently, so I'll quickly take you through this one. Being a SQL database, it's going to want to know where the SQL server is, which I will show you here. It's just connection details to a SQL server. And then it's saying, well, what do you want to ingest? This connector doesn't allow you to bring in the whole database. It really just allows you to pull in a single SQL query. You can join different tables together, it pulls it in, and then on a frequent basis, it will ingest more information and clear out ones that don't match. That's what we're doing in this connector. What I'll do is I'll just show you the actual SQL database I'm hooking into. So this is a warehouse. It's got products, it's got warehouses, and it's got the stock level, which is how much of each product is in each warehouse. And the products themselves are down here. It's pretty basic. We've got a name, such as the invisibility cloak, the description, and a cost. For those of you who have read Harry Potter, you might recognize these. These are things from a Harry Potter world. So we've ingested those in by setting up this connector. And you would expect then, if we were to go back out to Copilot over here, let me start a new chat. All right, let's ask it, tell me about the invisibility cloak product in the warehouse. Again, because it's graph connector, it's going to give better weighting to this information because it's inside of our environment, because I'm sure invisibility cloak product is probably out there on the internet and it would be able to find it. but instead it has found it. I can see it's found it in our product warehouse. It's telling me that it's product designed to render the wearer invisible, and it's telling me that it was last updated by me on that date. So it's getting that information out of the SQL database. What I'm going to ask it now, which seems reasonable, is how much does the invisibility cloak product cost? And you where to find it. What it'll tell us is, I don't know what the cost of it is. And this is this structured information. If we go back out to that database, it found the invisibility cloak because there was a few words around it. But as soon as you start getting into numbers, it doesn't necessarily know that that number is related to a cost. And this is the problem that you get with structured data and relational data, is that the graph connectors themselves aren't great at this structured data. There is some stuff you can do with schemas, but you add to map it to manage properties, but you will quickly run out of room when you try to do that. So the takeaway there is it's not great. But what we're going to go into is we're going to see some more techniques that are going to make it better at looking at structured data. All right, so that was first demo done. And this is where we're going to move away from graph connectors, and we're going to start talking about plugins. So the difference between the connectors and the plugins is connectors ingest the data into that semantic index. Plugins don't ingest data. They look directly in real time at your external systems. And that's the big difference between them. So it's really good for information that's changing frequently because you're looking directly at it. It's good from a security perspective if you need to keep that data in your external system and you don't want the overhead of bringing it inside and trying to secure it inside of your Microsoft 365 environment. It's better at structured data, which we'll see. And the other thing that it's good at is not only getting at knowledge, but also performing actions. So acting on it and making change in those external systems. Because via graph connectors, we're ingesting the data in. It's a one-way pull. We can't interact with the external systems. But plugins are much more powerful. And we're going to talk about 3 types of plugins that are available to us today. And the first one of those is through Copilot Studio Actions, which Daniel mentioned a bit earlier. And that leverages the power of Power Platform connectors to do that. That's a low-code solution. We're going to talk about message extensions, which are a pro-code solution, and API plugins, which are a pro-code solution. First of all, I'm going to talk about message extensions. These things have been around for years. They were born out of the Teams extensibility model. And the way that these are designed to work is that inside of Teams, and this is the animation that you see on this slide, is that when you're composing a message and you've got information in an external system, in this case it's Trello, you want to be able to search that external system and select an item from that system and then use that in your chat. So if you didn't have this capability, you would have to go out to that external system, find whatever you're looking for, or copy the URL, bring it back into Teams and paste the URL in there. So messaging extensions were a way of reaching out to your external systems and referencing information that was in it. Now, message extensions were part of Teams. They then exposed it to Outlook, so you could do the same things. When you're in Outlook, you can use a message extension to refer to items that are in an external system. If you've already built these, you can now expose these to the Copilot business chat experience as well. So you can talk to Copilot and you can ask it questions. The user interface is slightly different. I'm not going to do a live demo. That's why we've got the animation running here. The user interface is slightly different when you're using Copilot in that you don't see this search screen that was just on the screen then. You don't actually type something in and see the results. You ask Copilot. So here, if it was Trello, I could say, can you check Trello and find me a project called Microsoft Reactor? And it will just almost automate what you would have done by typing into the UI for a message extension, and you'll get the same result. The adaptive card, the result that would have gone into your chat message will now get returned inside of the Copilot experience. So if you've got those, you can bring those through quite easily to Copilot. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those because the topic that I wanted to get to later on around API plugins are far more powerful, and I can see them over time replacing message extensions. All right, the other 2 types of plugins that I want to talk about only exist inside of the concept of Copilot declarative agents. So I need to do a level set, talk about what declarative agents are, and then I'll bring in the other 2 types of plugins, and the rest of our time we'll spend inside of these declarative agents. Right, so we've got Copilot. We saw that experience that I was demoing where we're talking one-on-one with Copilot, and Copilot had available to it all of the base information and those graph connectors that we brought in. But the idea of a Copilot declarative agent is for you to define your own copilots based around a specific domain or expertise. You can think of these as subject matter experts, if you like. And rather than having all of the information available to them, the whole idea is that you, through the three things that are on the right-hand side here, which is looking inside of a declarative agent, the things that make it up, the first thing is the instructions, which tell it what is it, how is it to behave, how is it to interact with the user. Is it going to be helpful or is it going to be annoying? Is it going to be polite or is it going to be rude? What types of things can it answer? That's all to do with the instructions, and we just set that up using natural language, and we'll see that in a minute. But the other things that it brings in is, well, what knowledge is available to this declarative agent and what skills do we give it? And this allows us to actually narrow down more than open up the information. So you can really just point it to three particular documents and say that you're an expert, but I want you to just answer with this narrow set of knowledge. And you can see how that could work with a HR policy copilot, where you're giving it very narrow, trusted sources of information and saying you can answer people's questions, but only off this information. And what it can also do is we can bring skills into it as well. So you could think if we did a help desk copilot, your knowledge base might be all of your knowledge base articles, but your skills would be things like, well, let a user create a ticket in our help desk system. Let them ask what the status of their tickets are. Let them close a ticket so it can perform actions as well. I'm just going into this in a little bit more detail. If I tap onto the knowledge one here, and we'll go and have a look how you set this up. But the knowledge you can provide, especially when it comes to external data, is you can manually upload files, much like we saw at the prompt. You can give it websites, publicly available websites as knowledge sources. You can give it Microsoft 365 data, which like SharePoint and OneDrive locations or specific files even. But that's not really external data, which is the topic of the conversation today. Graph connectors, we've already talked about, but if you've created these graph connectors, then you can create your declarative agents and scope them to use certain graph connectors. And then we've got Dataverse as well, which Dataverse is really what underpins Microsoft Dynamics and the Power Platform. It uses Dataverse in the back end. So we can bring in external data, and I've got a demo of how to do that as well. And then on the skill side of things, we can perform actions. This declarative agent can perform actions, and we can do that by Power Platform connectors, message extensions, and API plugins. So these are those three different types of plugins that I was talking about. We already saw message extensions, and they can exist outside of these declarative agents, but the Power Platform connectors and the API plugins, they can only exist inside the declarative agents. And that's why I needed to talk about declarative agents first, and then we will have a look at these API plugins and the actions and Power Platform connectors. So I'm going to dive in, and we're going to demo all of that in this next one. All right, so where am I going to start this one from? I'm going to start this one from inside Copilot Studio. So this is where we create these declarative agents. So this is the low-code way of creating agents. There is a pro-code way, and we're going to demo that as well. So when we create an agent, we can actually create an agent by talking to it. There's a chat-based experience, and you end up with an agent at the end of the day. I'm going to skip that in the interest of time, and we are going to create ourselves an agent very, very quickly. So our agent is going to be called a product warehouse demo. We're going to use it to try and talk to this SQL database that the graph connectors weren't so great at doing, because it was the structured data. So we give it a description, which isn't so important in this one. The instructions are, so this is the behaviors that it has. So here, I've just told it what it can do. It can help people with queries around product details, stock levels from the warehouse database. It can create cards on a Trello board, which we'll have to give it those magic powers shortly. Use a professional, helpful tone. Always finish your messages with a smile face emoji. So this is behaviors of how we want it to interact with our users. Before we add knowledge, I'll hit create, because our knowledge sources, we can't actually add all the different types of knowledge sources until it actually exists and we've created it and saved it for the first time. So we'll wait for it to do that. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to add knowledge sources to it. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how we can add. So we can add knowledge to it just here. Now, what we can select from is public websites, just URLs, any of our SharePoint data, and Dataverse. We'll come back to Dataverse. But what we can also add in is any of our graph connectors that we've set up. It's a bit weird because they don't call them graph connectors. Well, they show up as the type. So we created the graph connector to our product warehouse, and the type of that was SQL. So that's why it's showing up under SQL there as knowledge. If I go in and select one of the other ones, custom connector, that's where my policy management system came in. So the interface is a little bit confusing. What I want to do here is I'm just going to add our graph connector to that SQL warehouse. And I'm just going to ask it a few questions. You see, it's super simple to connect in data sources here. If they're publicly available websites, if it's a graph connector that you've already set up, it's really, really quick to set these up. Okay. What is the invisibility cloak product? So this is exactly the same query that we asked of the graph connector out in the business chat experience. What you'll see is we get exactly the same response back in here. There's no difference. What I also wanted to show you is that it doesn't just get magic abilities by bringing it in and wrapping it in an agent. It still won't be able to tell us what the product cost is because it's relying on that same data that's been ingested. And there it is. Can't find, doesn't know it. That's a description of it. Oh no, the cost is not mentioned. Okay, so yep, it doesn't know about it. So let's get rid of that data source. It is not helpful to us in this scenario. What we will then talk about is we're going to talk about giving this additional skills. And these are a type of plugin. They're called actions as far as Copilot Studio goes. We can add an action. And this allows us to tap into what we're seeing here is we're seeing all of the Power Platform connectors. Now, Power Platform has been around for many, many, many years. So the ecosystem of what these things can do is very large, which is great. It's very helpful. It means that straight off the bat, we've got a lot of capabilities that we can add to Copilot. So one of these many things that's in here is I can talk to an Azure SQL database, which is where that Harry Potter stuff is. So Azure SQL, I want to use one called Get Rows. So what you typically find is these Power Platform connectors are very narrow in their use case. So this is Get Rows. It's very specific as to what it will do. And every connector is different. So in this case, I've got to give it an action name, Get Products, display name, let's use the same, Get Products. Description for the Copilot to know when to use this action. Now, this is important, and I'll talk to this in a sec. So we're saying this operation gets products from a warehouse database. Use this to search for products by name or description. You can find the cost of items, stock level, description, and name. You can answer questions such as, do we have any potions? What's the cheapest product? Find all products related to magic. We're not actually going to ask it any of those questions, but we're just giving Copilot an idea of why it might want to use this. Now, why is that important? Actually, I'll come back to why it's important. Let me just connect this up first. So we're using this connector. We're telling Copilot the types of things that it can use this connector for. But this connector being to SQL, it needs us to set up some values. And these ones are the name of the server, the name of the table, that sort of information. Now, Copilot, for some use cases, and I will show you one of these, is that you will want Copilot to try to extract the values to use in your connector from the prompt itself, from what the user is providing you with. In this case, it's the actual details of the SQL database. So we really want to pretty much just hard code those. We're not expecting the user to give those to us in the prompt. So the name of the server, I've got that here. The name of the database, again, not something that we'd expect the user to tell us. So we will provide that. The configuration time. That's the name of the database, and the name of the table, the same. We don't want to bother the user about telling us that. Okay, let me save that. So that's our inputs. And on our outputs, we don't want to do a lot with that, but what I do want to do is any information that's returned, this just allows it to store it in the conversation. So as the conversation continues, whatever got responded to, it becomes part of the data of that conversation. So we will want that so that the Copilot can answer us. All right, so let's go next. So I think we've set all of that up. And now I'll describe why this was important. Why was it important to give Copilot such a good description for this connector? Hit finish. Processing our request. Okay, it's done it now. And it's actually giving us a reminder up here, which is good. And what it's saying is enable your Copilot to respond with the best combination of actions and topics using generative AI. So what had to happen before about 2 months ago is if you set one of these up, you would also have to configure topics. Now, topics are a way of guiding a conversation. So it's almost like if a user asks about, and I'd have to, in this case, say if a user asks about stuff to do with the product, like the price of a product or anything to do with the product, then you should use this action. And it's almost like you would guide it, and it was like a workflow. What we can now do, and what this is suggesting that I do, is go into settings, go into generative AI, and say, let Copilot decide the best mix of actions, topics, and knowledge. So what we've really done is we've armed it with a skill. We've armed it with the ability to go out to that SQL database and interrogate the SQL database. And based on that description that we gave it, the type of thing that it could use it for, we're hoping that it will just think, oh, I've got these skills. That skill matches what I think the user is trying to get at, and I'll just automatically pick up that skill and use it. All right, that should be all we need to do. All right, let's go for the $1 million question that it hasn't been able to answer so far, is how much does the invisibility cloak product cost? Now this will come up. This is part of the Power Platform connector architecture. It's actually asking us to set up the connection for the very first time, to trust the connection, to trust the Power Platform connector and set that up. So I'm going to have to do that the very first time. Okay, we're all good. We'll retry that. Okay, the cost of the invisibility cloak is $1,000. It didn't make that up. It actually found it in that SQL table. We go back to our here. What you will also notice is that in this table, in the Harry Potter world, for those of you who may not have read the books, there is a game called Quidditch. Somewhere in here, there'll be some products that have got something to do with Quidditch. Here's a few of them. Here we go. Mentions the word Quidditch. There's a few. So it's a sport. There's items in our warehouses to do with Quidditch. But we can start to ask much more advanced questions now. So how about if I have $300, what is the maximum number of Quidditch products that I can purchase? So just by setting up that simple connector, I'm expecting it now to go out there, query. It's actually found those 3 items that had to do with the sport of Quidditch. It knows what the prices of them are. Now it's using, we're now down to foundational models. It's using the power of LLMs to figure out what the cost of it is, figure out all the different combinations, and it's coming down to tell us like the best combinations of what we could possibly purchase. So pretty powerful. We're now interrogating in real time that external system. If those values change, it's going to be interrogating that as we talk. So pretty powerful, given that all we did was give it a description of what it could do, and we gave it the connection details to a table inside of SQL. All right, so that is far more powerful than what we're seeing once we ingest data through a graph connector. Up until this point, however, we have just been doing what we'd call retrieval and summarization operations. We've just been making sense of the information. Now we're going to go the other way. We're going to actually try and make updates in an external system. So for that, we're going to go to actions again. We're going to add a new action. And the action this time is to a Trello system. For those of you who have not come across Trello, this is what it looks like. It's basically a task management, Kanban management, basic task management type system. We've got different cards that sit on a board here. I'm going to give Copilot the action to create cards on that Trello board for us. So again, there's a Power Platform connector for it. Action name, that's good enough. It's descriptive enough, I think. Again, we've got some things that we need to set up. A board ID, so we're going to have to set some of these things up because we can't expect a user to know them. So again, like we did with the SQL connection, I'm going to hard code the board ID for that board that I just showed you. I'm going to hard code the list ID. But this time, the last property that's looking for here, card name, well, I want the user to be able to specify what the card name is. So I want Copilot, when it goes to use this connector, we've given it what board we want to create it on, but when it comes to, well, what's the name of the card that we want the user to create? Well, that's something that we want the user to tell us. And we could actually add additional ones in here. We could add a due date and who we want it to assign to. I'm just going to leave it at the card name for now, but we're going to get that from the user's response. And we'll leave it up to Copilot to figure out how to ask for that. But it's quite cool in the options we can give it here. We can actually say, well, when it comes to this one parameter, we want to customize exactly how we want Copilot to ask for it. We can say to Copilot, well, try this many times in different ways to extract that information out of the user. We can even validate it once it's got a value from the user. It doesn't pass our validation before actually passed on and try and create something with it. I'm not going to use any of that smart stuff. I'm just going to leave it up to the user to do that. Okay, so there are our inputs, our outputs. I don't need to do anything for that on this particular card. I think we're good to go. Processing our request. Okay, so now we've got 2 powers. Now we're going to test this out. For this, I'm going to ask it, first of all, go out to that SQL database. It should pick the right skill to use. I'm going to say, go out and find all the plants that we've got in the product warehouse. Hopefully it will find some. We can actually see over here, this activity map as we're testing it, it's showing us the logic that it's using. This is the orchestration. It's saying, okay, you've asked me for something in the warehouse. I think the best thing to do is use that SQL connector and go out. And it has, it's come back, it's found something called gillyweed and something called mandrake root. Now we're going to say, okay, you found those 2 things. Well, what I'd really like you to do is create a Trello card for each plant. For the name of the card, use the prefix research, followed by the plant's name. And because they're cool, just add a little plant emoji to the end of that when you create the card. Much like we did the first time we used the SQL connection, this is going to prompt me to set up the connection. Here we go. So I will have to go out and set this up for the very first time I use that type of connector. So set up the Trello connection. Okay, my suite, hit retry. All right, I've created Trello cards for the plants, research gillyweed, research mandrake root. It's giving me links out to the system. If I actually go over here onto the Trello board, we've got 2 new cards there. So right now, we've now got a Copilot that's acting intelligently, answering questions from a SQL database that doesn't exist inside of Microsoft 365 and creating tasks on a Trello board that doesn't exist inside of Microsoft 365. And all we gave it was it showed it where a card was, where that Trello board was, and where that SQL database table was. And again, that's working in real time, obviously, to create that information out there. And you can see, you can sort of follow it through in this session as to how it's answering, the logic it's going through to pick the skills and the knowledge. Right, I think that's the end of that. We're going to jump back into the presentation. All right, the last one that I wanted to talk about, last type of plugin that I wanted to talk about was API plugins. Now, these are a pro code solution. And before we get into how it works, because it is diving down a bit more technical, I just wanted to talk about like why you would use this. What is the reasons and why is this? I think this is probably the most powerful of them all. But in order to understand why it's super powerful is that you have to understand how systems are really built and have been built for the last decade or more, and how we're still building them today. Now, typically, if you take any type of typical application that's built today, it would have some sort of back-end service, which is represented on the left-hand side of the screen, and you have some sort of client application, which is represented on the right-hand side of the screen. And you might have multiple client applications. Like that could be a web application that interacts through a website. It could be a desktop application. It could be a mobile phone application. And your back-end service would be that same service. And your back-end service, in this case, it looks like it's some sort of consulting company. You've got consultants who have properties like a name, a bio, location, skills. You've got projects, name, location, start date, status. You probably have consultants working on projects. They probably bill hours to projects. This is the type of system we're talking about. But how does that client application on the front end talk to that back-end application? The way that's done is typically through a RESTful API. Now, these RESTful APIs, there's a standard. It's an industry standard way of talking to it, and it happens. It's web requests going back and forward over HTTP protocol. And if we actually have a look, there's typical operations you would expect application to be able to perform, things like view a list of consultants. This is actually how it happens. It fires off a URL. You'd have your HTTPS in the front of this thing, but it would say at some point it would say /API/consultants, and you would expect that to return you a list of consultants because this is what the standard dictates. There's also a list of actions. There's only 5 or 6 of them. But if you want to get something, it means I'm giving you nothing. I'm just giving you this URL, but I'm expecting objects back as a result. So the pattern that gets followed is if we ask for consultants, we'd get back a list of consultants. If we ask for consultants and pass in the ID of a consultant, we'd get back all the details of just one consultant. We use a patch. It's the same URL with the same ID as how we got the consultant's details. If we want to update them, we do a patch. If we want to delete that consultant, we delete it. So there's this pattern that gets followed, and this is actually a standard. It's called Open API standard. That's also for, if you come down here to creating a project, you do a post operation. Like if we were to do a get operation against that, it would give us a list of all the projects. If we do a post operation, then that's how we create one. And what's also defined in this definition is for some of these operations, probably for all of these operations, you either have to supply some information, we call that the request object, or when you call it, you're going to get something back, and that's what's called the response object. So two examples of that would be a request object would be doing a post. So if I was doing a post to create a new project, then in that request, I would have to post up all the details that are required to create the new project. But how do we know what that looks like? Well, the standard defines what a request object would look like for that endpoint. So if you want to create a new project, here is exactly the type of information that you need to pass up to it. And response objects are what comes back. So if we were getting the consultant's details, well, here's what the response object looks like. So there is standards around this, industry standards, and it's called an Open API standard. So what API plugins are all about is that because there is this standard, systems are being built to this standard. And really what this client application is doing here is this is a UI, if you like, over the top of this API. This is a UI that can talk to a RESTful API. What Microsoft has done with Copilot has said, you don't need this thing anymore. You could still use this, but what if Copilot could understand the Open API and you could just talk to the API? Because we know all the operations because this thing defines it. We know that what the request object is if you try to use it because it's defined in the standard, and I can understand what's coming back because that's defined in the standard as well. So this idea of API plugins is that Copilot and you in natural language via Copilot can now talk to the backend APIs directly without the need for a client application. Daniel, this is where I need your assistance to be amazing with technology.
I don't know about that, but let's have a go.
This one is a bit hard for me to demo live, so we've got a video that's going to run through a demo of these API plugins and how they work. So we just have to do some magic to switch screens here. While we're doing that switch, and we've got that one on, we've switched it over already.
Oh. Can you guys hear that online?
We get a thumbs up if anyone can hear a video playing online. You might need to start it again, Daniel.
Now, the problem, I haven't shared audio when I've started this meeting.
We've got a hand up.
Was that a yes or a no to the, I was just going to play this a little bit and let me know if you can hear this when you're online. Thumbs up. Thumbs up, thumbs down, no good. I'm not getting any responses online. Oh, hang on, there's a chat. Let me just have a look. No. All right, so what I'm going to do, I am just going to reshare my screen and I'm going to do this. And now I am going to do this. What about now?
So this is the API definition we're looking at here at the moment. So as you can see, it's an open API specification that this file format adheres to. It's really telling us where the endpoint is for this API. And you can see here we've got the paths, so /consultants, and this is a /consultants get operation. And we're defining what it is that this does, this endpoint does. So it gets the consultants working at Trade Research based on the consultant's name, project, certain skills. You can see here the parameters that can be passed into this get operation is the consultant's name, is an optional query parameter, the project's name, the skills, certification. If we go down further, you'll also notice that we have the responses that this API can respond. So a successful response, and it shows us what would be in that response object. So you can see down here, it's going to have a name, an email address, a phone number, a location, which is itself an object that contains a street, a city, and so forth. So this is all really powerful because it's explaining to Copilot how to call it, how you can interact with it, and also what to expect back from it. So as I say, the Open API is a definition that exists outside of Microsoft 365 Copilot system, but you'll notice there's some other critical files here. So stepping into the Tray plugin, this is now into the Microsoft 365 Copilot world. And this is us taking that definition file, but adding even more information to it to assist Microsoft 365 Copilot with how to use it. So as you can see, that consultants call that we were just looking at in the Open API definition, we gave it an operation ID here, get consultants. And then in this plugins file, this matches up with get consultants operation and the name here. So this allows us to give even more information about how to call this endpoint. So again, we're just providing more descriptions there. But one of the key things that allows us to do is that after we've made a call to this and we've got a response back, we can actually specify an adaptive card to use and give a really nice rendition of that response that's going to come back, and we can lay it out and provide all the functionalities that adaptive cards allow. So you can do that for certain. You don't have to do that, but it gives you the capability of doing that. And then from that point, we roll it right up into the declarative agent. So this sort of looks familiar from what we were looking at in Copilot Studio when we were creating a declarative agent. This is the code way of creating a declarative agent. So as you can see, we've got a name, we've got a description for our declarative agent, and we've got instructions. So this is how it behaves. Greet users in a professional manner, introduce yourself as Trey Genie, offer to help. The conversation starters, we'll see those in a minute, but these are little tiles that you'll see at the top when you're conversing with your Copilot, and users can just click on those tiles. They're almost like just starter prompts, if you like. Capabilities, these map to the knowledge. So this could be things like your graph connectors for knowledge. In this case, it's OneDrive and SharePoint location that can use as knowledge. And the actions, this is what refers across to the plugins definition file, which in turn refers to the Open API specifications. This is where it gets its skills from. So let's see all of that in action, shall we? So come across, we're in BizChat over here. And on the right-hand side, we have Trade Genie Local. This is our declarative Copilot. Here we have those conversation starters or starter prompts. So we click on one of those. It's just going to put the prompt in. So find consultants with TypeScript skills. It's going to call the API endpoint. And we've found 2 consultants that have skills, have TypeScript skills. Let's try some other prompts, shall we? Let's go for... Tell me about the Woodgrove project. So rather than hitting the consultants endpoint now, we're going to be hitting the projects endpoint. And it's giving us some information about the Woodgrove project. But you can also see here, we have an adaptive card that's coming through, and it's allowing us to present it in a pre-formatted way and provide extra functionality. Here you can see we've got project metrics coming through. We can view a map of where that project's based. We can go across objects. So we want to know what projects Domi is working on. So this is going to have to search for obviously the consultant and then find out what projects it's working on, and then bring back project details. We can not show adaptive cards, even though adaptive cards are set up. If I was to prompt it with something like this, list all the consultants we have, but just show me their name and location. Okay, so this time I'm not getting adaptive cards back because I've specifically asked it to show me it in a particular way. And we can filter using multiple things as well. So you'll notice when we looked at that consultant's endpoint, there was multiple things we could query on the consultant's name, their skills, location. So here we'll try 2 things. So show me consultant skilled in JavaScript and located in the USA. Okay, and it's found us Avery, who is located in the USA and has JavaScript skills. Okay, so up till this point in time, I have been showing basically retrieval operations, trying to find information, make sense of it. But we can also do actions as well. So one of the endpoints that was in there was the ability to update your billing hours against a project. So let's ask Copilot to charge 10 hours against the Woodgrove Bank project. Okay, it's wanting to make an update here. So as a safety mechanism, this is the recommended way of doing things, is to get confirmation before you do updates. All right, 10 hours have been successfully charged to the Woodgrove Bank project, as you can see. One of the other things I wanted to show you here is I've got developer mode switched on. It will show you the orchestration that Microsoft 365 Copilot is doing. So here we've got enabled plugins. We've got an enabled plugin. We've got the different endpoints, the functions: get consultants, get user information, get projects, post bill hours, post assigned consultant. And then based on the intent, it's matching that against what the most appropriate endpoint is to call. So it's picked or selected the get consultants endpoint to try and find consultants. Here we've asked it to find a consultant in the USA, skilled in JavaScript. So you can see how it's making that selection. And this is based on those descriptions that we give inside of the file. So the more descriptive we can make it, the more likely Copilot is to select the right endpoint to call. And then you can see it's actually making a call against it and the response that it gets back. So this helps us understand how that orchestration is happening and how Copilot is choosing to do or perform the actions that it's performing.
All right. So that was the demo of the plugin APIs. So as you can see, it's super powerful. Obviously, it's a pro-code solution, but you can see that it really opens up a world of opportunities as how we can interact and really just talk to our external systems using Copilot. All right, so a quick recap of everything that I've presented so far. So really, when it comes to knowledge, the things that we went through are the ability to reference files and websites directly. The files really get ingested into Microsoft 365. You can reference websites, but public ones only, because they can't be secured. We need to be able to get at them. And that can be used inside or outside of this concept of creating your own custom agents, or if you're doing it inside of BizChat. Graph connectors, they ingest data into Microsoft 365. They're not good for frequently changing data because that ingestion happens on a schedule. They're really good for unstructured data, websites, files. They're not good for structured data, as we saw when we tried to hit up that SQL database. One good thing about graph connectors is they're really omnipresent. If you can get data in through a graph connector, they'll turn up in Microsoft 365 Search. They turn up in lots more places than just Copilot. Dataverse. I did not even demo Dataverse. Oh, my goodness. I missed that one in all the demonstrations. Dataverse, tempted to demo it. I think I'm going to have to demo it. Let me quickly dive into Dataverse. So Dataverse is it's the data platform that sits behind the Power Platform, and a lot of those connectors, Power Platform connectors that we've been talking about, that's all part of this Power Platform world as well. But the Dataverse, as I said, Dataverse is the data store that sits behind it, and it's structured. It's all about tables, and it's about relationships between tables. It's almost like it's one massive database for your enterprise, and you share all of these different tables inside of your Power Platform and your Dataverse environment. So out of the box, this is a fairly standard one. You have a whole heap of basic tables that come with Dataverse, and then you can add your own custom ones in. And what I've actually done in this instance is I've used a data flow to pull in our SQL database. And I'll show you what a data flow looks like. Test, I can't even spell test, that's all right, we're not going to go through creating it. It has got all these different data sources that you can connect to. So all I've done, similar to what we did when we set up the agent connected to the database, is I've just pulled in our SQL database in through this data flow, and that in turn has created the three tables. The warehouse products table, which we're familiar with, the Harry Potter products are sitting inside of here. There we go, there's all the Harry Potter products. We also got a warehouse table and a stock level table. So the warehouse has got the names of the different warehouses in it, and then the stock level just tells us how much is in each warehouse. So I jump over quickly to Copilot Studio. I just wanted to show you this one because it is super powerful for those of you that are using data platform and have already got data in Dataverse. If we go over into this environment, don't have time to create another Copilot, but I'll show you this one that's already set up. Okay, Dataverse. But really here, I've not given this one any of those skills, those actions that we had to set up. All I have done is I've gone in here, I've added knowledge. When you come in here and add knowledge and you say Dataverse, you get all of your Dataverse tables. And I've just selected 3 of them. That honestly is all I've done in here. I selected the warehouse. Here it is, the warehouse, stock level, and warehouse products table. That is all that I've enabled. And now I can ask questions such as, I need to know how much gillyweed we have and which warehouses it's in. Now, the gillyweed's going to come out of the products table. The warehouses are obviously in the warehouse table, and there's a relationship between those, and the relationship between them is the stock table sitting in between. So we have 2 stock levels of gillyweed. The main warehouse has 100 units, while the central warehouse has 75. So not only now are we getting at structured data, but we're also getting at relational structured data. What else can I ask it? I can ask it data that's not there. Which warehouses don't have any stock gillyweed? So up the top there, I'm hoping it's not gonna come back and tell us it's the main warehouse and the central warehouse. It hasn't been able to find it. Okay, doesn't always love working. Sometimes it's just you need to start the chat again. Sometimes it gets confused. I've now lost the ability to even type into that box. Here we go. Which ones don't have any stock of gillyweed? Okay, it's telling us it's 3 houses. We only had 5 warehouses. The 2 that had them, they're the ones that don't. Final prompt that we'll fire at this one is provide me with a bullet point summary with the following info: description of gillyweed, the price, and the total quantity we have. So here it's got to look up multiple different tables. It's got to summarize information from one of them. And what else is it got to do? Price of it, total. So we're hoping it can find, which we can. We knew it had from a previous question. We knew we had 100 of them in one warehouse, 75 in the other warehouse. So really good at doing relational data. All right, I had to show you that because it's super powerful if you're using Dataverse. I'll go back there. So yeah, the data sources that we've now demoed, graph connectors, and we looked at Dataverse as well. So those are the ones that you can connect in as knowledge. Dataverse as well is it's a complex one because it's looking at Dataverse in real time, but you saw that I had to use a data flow to get the information in, and that data flow that got the information in, that happens on a scheduled basis. So it's still not great at real-time data. There is in Dataverse the concept of what's called a virtual table. So you can bring data in to play part of Dataverse, which the data actually remains in your external system. I am not sure whether Copilot is capable of doing that at the moment. I haven't tested it out, but hopefully that is coming. And then it would be better at frequently changing data. Great for structured data, and as you saw, it was really good for relational data. And the other thing that you can actually use it for in Dataverse is Dataverse is very powerful at being able to combine different data and manipulate it on the way up. So you can always do a transform on the way up as you bring it in from the SQL database. You can transform it and then make it available to Copilot. Then on the action side of things, we talked about, well, first of all, what's different between knowledge and actions, recapping on that. Knowledge was really bringing things in on a scheduled basis, and they're forming part of your semantic index and your grounding data. Actions, the data stays in the external system, and we're referring to it in real time. And so they're really good for the frequently changing data. Not only are they good for retrieval operations, but when talking about actions, we can also perform actions in those external systems. We talked about messaging extensions, which a pro-code solution. You may already be using those today, which is why I would suggest using them. If you've already gone to the effort of building them, then expose them through Copilot. But real messaging extensions, in my mind, what they're really allowing you to do is call an API endpoint, one API endpoint with one search term and get a result back. So really you're calling one API endpoint with one parameter. You saw what we looked at there with the API plugins, where we could call any endpoint, basically anything that the API was capable of. So that's why I think over time API plugins are going to totally replace messaging extensions. because message extensions are very narrow, and that's just one part of what an API plugin can do. Then we saw the Power Platform connectors, which were inside of the low-code solution, inside of Copilot Studio, and we had that where we used the get rows one to get at our SQL data. We used the Trello one to create a card. What you'll notice there is there's a huge ecosystem because this isn't new for Copilot. The ecosystem already existed, but every one of those connectors is very specific in its capability. So what you end up finding is that you end up combining heaps of those together. And then when we went to the API plugins, it's almost the converse. It's a pro-code solution, but we enabled absolutely everything that was available to us in an API. All right, I think I'm done. I think I'm done. We've gone through a lot, and believe it or not, there are actually more options, and there's a lot more coming as well. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Daniel to coordinate a bit of Q&A across in person and those who are joining us remotely.
So there, I'm going to grab the microphone. And can everybody online hear me? Thumbs up. Oh, we're good. Oh, this is actually going to work. All right. That means I can take a seat. And you ready, Cam?
I don't know.
All right. We're going to start with Mark. So ingesting data into M365. So is that pulling data? So when we're ingesting data into M365, is it pulling data into SharePoint, or where is it pulling that data into?
Okay, if we're doing it through a graph connector, it's not bringing it into SharePoint. So you won't see it in a SharePoint library. It is bringing it into just the semantic index. And it's not the full, it's not all of the information that's in a file. It's almost like a search index. So if you had your SharePoint data, behind the scenes, that information would have got, like in a traditional world, before the semantic index, you had the concept of a search index. And so search would run over your content, and it would keep a copy of what it thought was important inside of your search index. When we ingest data through those graph connectors, it goes into a repository, but it's not SharePoint. It's going into the Graph API, and you can access it through Graph API calls. And then, so it sits in the Graph API, and then it's another step to get it inside. It goes into both the search index and the semantic index. And that happens as just part of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. Anything that's ingested into the graph then gets put into the search index and into your semantic index.
Well answered. Couldn't have got better myself. Now, Mark also asks, what's the value if it can't access structured data in an application? What about data in an M365 data architecture, like a data lake or data bricks?
Ooh, very good question. Data lake and data bricks. These come more from the Azure world. They don't come from the Power Platform world, which is sort of Dataverse. These are coming from the Azure world. And I would say today it's not quite there. When I say it's not quite there, the tile is actually there for it. There's something called Fabric, Microsoft Fabric. And the idea behind Microsoft Fabric is to give one consolidated way of getting at large data repositories, and that includes OneLake. And Microsoft will be bringing that through to Copilot. I am still sharing my screen. If I was to jump into a browser here, and if I were to add knowledge and go to advanced, we will see a tile here for Microsoft Fabric. So Microsoft Fabric, is your answer. So Microsoft Fabric will give you access to Data Lake and OneLake through Azure. It will also give you the ability to access a lot of those other large repositories of information that you would be using inside of Azure. And there's a lot that can be synced into it. If I could, is there a diagram in one of these things somewhere, one of these articles? No, I can't. Don't think I'm going to be able to. No, there's not. But there's a lot of other information. There's a lot of other repositories of information. One of the big ones Microsoft just announced at Ignite was Snowflake integration. There's lots of big data sort of sources that you, first of all, connect them into Microsoft Fabric. and then Copilot will be able to talk to Microsoft Fabric, and that is going to really designed for relational structured data.
Very good. Now, Keith asks, do you know much about Google Notebook?
No.
Okay. So, sorry, Keith. I think that the data concept is similar to Google Notebook, but we might leave that one. Now, can we build a Copilot Studio chatbot with a graph connector to perform chat with unstructured data, which is on SharePoint?
Yes. Focus of my talk is bringing in information from outside of Microsoft 365. And this is probably the demo that Daniel was going to give if he had time.
I did put a link in the chat to a demo on the Copilot agents for SharePoint. So check that out as well.
Was the question, could you create a declarative agent
that
uses
a chatbot with a graph connector? Perform chat with unstructured data, which is on SharePoint. But would you need that?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the question, the chatbot bit. If we're talking a declarative agent, you could just add knowledge in here to SharePoint, and you just point it at files or sites directly and bring that in, which is how you would do it here. There's also the new ability, which I believe they announced at Ignite, where you could do it from the SharePoint side of things.
You can, and that's the video that I posted in the chat. So if you check out that video in the chat for you guys here in the audience, and remember we've got a jam-packed audience here live that are eating some food. I'll show you that. I'll put that video up here on the screen afterwards as well. But for those online, if you check that video out, that'll show you the SharePoint Copilot agents. Okay, next. I've tried to do something similar to this, but the prompt also scans across the enterprise, so chats, messages, emails. How can you stop Copilot from doing that and only target the SQL connector? So when you're doing that SQL stuff?
Yes, these Copilot agents, these declarative agents, are the way of doing that. So when you're out in the full Copilot BizChat experience, you kind of untargeted at this point in time. It's all that information that's been made available. And it's kind of the beauty of creating an agent, is that you create an agent around a specific domain of knowledge. And really, it is only going to know what knowledge you add. So it's almost the opposite of Copilot, BizChat experience. It's got no real agenda. It's not focused on anything. And so it's just trying to make the best of all of the information that's available. And that sounds like it's the problem you're having, is there's too much information available to it. So that's the idea of these agents, is you create one for a specific purpose and you just give it specific knowledge. You can actually turn this one off, so this toggle here, allow the AI to use its own general knowledge. You can actually switch that off, which means don't reach out to the internet. Just stick to what I've given you. And through the instructions, you could tell it what you wanted to do. You could, I think, even if you put a piece of knowledge in there, you could tell it, do not answer any questions. Even if you fed it the knowledge, it will adhere to those instructions. That's like the user's going to ask prompts, but this is almost like you pre-prompting the agent. It's like, I know the user's going to ask you stuff, but this is how I want you to respond. And so you can just tell it what you want it to do and not do.
Okay, I'm not sure what part of this obviously relates to, but you must have mentioned something about frequently changing data.
Frequently changing data,
now,
yes.
What does that mean? Well, I hope I pronounced this correctly. Dipowski. What is frequently changing data? What does it mean in hours and minutes?
Yep, no problem. So for all of the plugins, they reach out in real time. So, I mean, that's good for frequently changing data, no matter what frequency it's changing at, whether it be every second that it changes or whether it be monthly that it changes, it doesn't matter because you're accessing it in real time. But for graph connectors, if I go into Microsoft 365 admin, where we actually set these up, Microsoft 365 admin, this is the demo right at the start where we configured these things. Settings, search and intelligence, and data sources. And I come in here. Each of these connectors will have a schedule as to how often do you want me to recrawl that external source, like if this one that's crawling my blog site. And current crawl, next crawl, last crawl. So you've got to set up a schedule as to how often it's going to go out and do that. And that is the same for all these different connector types. And based on the connectors and the time it takes to do it, you typically only have those scheduled maybe only every hour. I don't think it would make sense. I haven't seen any in real world configured more frequently than that. But and so that's what I mean by frequently changing data. Like if you had one here which was stock prices, you wouldn't use a graph connector because it's data that's changing all the time and it's never going to be accurate when the user's asking you a question. So frequently changing data, I would say if it's changing daily and it's not a huge data source, if it's not millions and millions of items, and if you could crawl it within an hour, you could probably set the frequency to be daily. But if it's data that doesn't change much at all, you might only set these things to recrawl every week or something like that. In which case, as long as users are okay with the data being out of date by at least that much, then graph connectors could still work for you.
When it crawls the data again using the Graph API, does it only pull in the change blocks for the whole block again?
Depends on the connector. Depends on the connector as to how much it will, how much it crawls. It certainly it won't drop the data and then re-get it. It will detect whether it needs to do an update, and it will drop any data that it needs to, and it will bring in any new data, and anything that's remains unchanged and leaves unchanged. So for websites, it'll use the last modified date of pages, so it'll keep an index and it'll compare that. For a SQL one, you actually have to tell it what is the key for when I go to do updates. It might be a bit too far to go into here, but you basically pass for this one, you pass a SQL query at it, but then you actually get control over what is the unique key in a watermark column. So watermark column is telling it what do I compare to every time I run that crawl to know whether I need to update the data or not for each row.
Now we might have to take this one offline, but how do we calculate the proposed consumption of the M365 tenant when we use the graph connectors? So for example, if we add a graph API connector to an on-premise file server, and we connect to around 800 gigs of data, then how much of the tenant's capacity is consumed and what capacity bucket will it use from?
I'm going to have a crack at that one, Daniel.
Okay, go for it.
Microsoft have just announced a change in this area in that I don't believe it is done on the size of the data, it's done on the number of items. As you can see here, I've just clicked on this policy management one and it tells me that I've indexed 10 items. Index limit for any one connector is 5 million items. And it used to be the case that your Microsoft 365 license gave you 5 million items, I think it was. It might have only been 1 million items, and then you had to pay for it in increments after that. And they've now raised that to 50 million items for any tenancy. And I don't believe it matters the size of the items, it's the number of items. So here's how you can see how many you're using. Your first 50 million are free. The cost after that, I can't recall off the top of my head.
Very good. We've got two more online, and then we'll go to in person if we've got any in person. Is it also possible to create a connector or an agent to an on-premise Oracle database?
Oh. Don't know off the top of my head. That one has stumped me. I'm sure I've seen Oracle in here somewhere. It's not as a connector there. It's on one of these as an action, as a Power Platform. And on-premise adds an extra level of complexity to it. There's Oracle databases. As to whether they're in the cloud or on-premise, I do not know, but there's a glimmer of hope there.
All right, very good. Your demo indicates we can connect to Azure SQL database. Can we connect to SQL on Azure an Azure VM to Copilot through the Power Platform gateway or other means?
I don't know. If you can do it to Oracle like that, there'll be a similar option definitely for SQL. Just trying to see if there's one here. I think there might be a Azure SQL. There's Oracle database there. Microsoft SQL Server. There we go. Let's connect to SQL 2008 or later. I would say good chance.
Potential there. Cool. Very good. All right. in person, have we got any questions? We have not by the looks of it.
If there's nobody else, I can.
I know you've got questions.
Some of them were almost answers like yes.
Okay.
But I'm just thank you very much for that. When we have Graph Connect and you say you don't actually take the data to our platform, but actually we create like a semantic index, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that work when they provide also metadata? So to better understand what you get data, but also yes, and particularly when there is a data governance platform, Microsoft has something, but so there's also other versions for Libra, and we want to integrate it. Like if like this is part of the whole system, they want to manage the data governance through some other platform, so they want to make sure that you don't freely access everything unless you make sure that it's like.
Yeah. Okay, so the graph, that's probably one of the issues with ingesting data through a graph connector, is that there's potentially security governance concerns if you're bringing that information into that semantic index. So you're only bringing it into the semantic index through graph connectors. If you use the actions, the Power Platform actions, so any of those plugins, the Power Platform actions, the message extensions, or the plugin API, they all reach out to the external system all the time. It does not, the information does not come into the semantic index. So it's what we call a RAG operations, a retrieval augmentation. So the Copilot sort of processes the prompt and it thinks that there might be information that's going to help me if I reach out to that external system. It'll reach out, get the data back, just use it in that conversation, and then throws it away. The difference with the Graph Connector is it brings it in, it then actually, it's grounding process, putting it into the semantic index, and it lives then in the semantic index. But those other plugin types don't do that.
Another question? Let's be run the mic over here.
So what's the purpose of having connected? Why can't we just do everything with action, which is having like data? Is it following things that it will process it slow and it just like preload stuff into that index?
So the question is, why would you ingest it in through a graph connector versus just always using those plugins, those real-time access? One of it is performance, and the other one is also how widely available it is. So the Power Platform connectors, you have to create a declarative agent. It only works inside of a declarative agent. So you have to create something that's domain specific, and then you can use those actions to reach out to the system. Where you couldn't use that is in that standalone in, what am I talking about here? In this experience here, you can't use the Power Platform connectors. So you could only use it when we went and created a specific declarative agent here that was for one particular use case, like it had certain knowledge. That's where you can use those Power Platform connectors. But anything that you bring in via a graph connector will be available here because it just forms part of the data. Microsoft almost sees that as native first-party data if you bring it in through a graph connector. Whereas the plugins, you actually have to utilize them in some way. But something I didn't show you was how you can publish these. When you go to publish an agent, I didn't want to actually publish it like that. Fill that. So here, channels. That's what I want to show. Channels is like, well, we've just been setting them up, but then where do you want to publish it to? So you can publish it to Microsoft Teams, you can publish it to a standalone website, host it out on your own custom website, but still a user has to go to it to be able to use it. Whereas if you're bringing it in through a graph connector, it's just available in the generic experience. So that'd be one of the big reasons why you go one over the other. Have we got any more in-person questions?
I think we are good.
Excellent.
All right, we will wrap things up there. So everybody online, thank you very much for joining online. And yes, there was a lot of questions about whether the session was recorded. Yes, I will post the session out. Look at those, all those claps. Cameron, you are a superstar. So the session will be sent out and posted out. Thanks everybody for joining in person.
big round of applause for Cameron. And once again, everybody online, before you jump off, just give us some more claps and everything. Actually, because hang on. I want to take a photo. Just give me 2 seconds. Give me 2 seconds.
Keep those claps coming.
Don't go online. Just wait. Can you just give me some more hand claps and hearts and thumbs and everything you can possibly do? Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. And yes, I will post it out. Thank you. Thanks, Cam. Amazing.
Thanks.
Great session.